The early Cambrian was a crucial period in the history of life on Earth, witnessing an explosion in animal diversity. About 540 million years ago, the seas were home to the first wave of new animal groups, some of which would eventually die out, but others would lead to the evolution of the first vertebrates. The start of the Cambrian is marked by the appearance of a vast array of animal forms and marine sedimentary rocks that are unknown in older rocks. This explosion in diversity saw the arrival of most of the major groups of animals or animal body plans. They included the first chordates animals that at some point in their life cycle possess a notochord, the precursor of a backbone, and the first vertebrates. Vertebrates are a group of animals that possess a backbone, vertebral column, which surrounds the notochord and provides support for the body. They also have a skull, cranium, that encloses the brain, eyes, olfactory organs, and internal ears. Another important characteristic of vertebrates is that parts of the head, gill arches, and nerves form from neural crest cells. These cells migrate from the nerve cord early in the development of the embryo and travel to different parts of the animal to form these structures. Other vertebrate features include the nervous control of the heart, a set of muscles to control eye movement, extrinsic muscles, at least 2 semicircular canals in the inner ear, and a lateral line system running along the head and body that has sensory organs called neuromasts. All extinct jawless fish are vertebrates. Of the 2 living groups, lampreys are considered to be vertebrates, but many authorities exclude hagfish because of their poorly developed vertebral column. However, hagfish do have a cranium. Until quite recently, it was thought that vertebrates arose in the Ordovician. In 1984, a remarkable early Cambrian fossil site was discovered in Chengjiang, Yunnan Province, China. Most of the 180-plus species found there are invertebrates, but in 1999, 2 530-million-year-old vertebrates were announced to the world. Many organisms increased in size, strength, and speed during the Ordovician, although most marine life remained quite small. The sea saw the arrival of jawless fish that exhibited a major development in vertebrate evolution: bony plates and scales. Microvertebrate faunas contain animals that are known from bits of bone, scales, or teeth, generally obtained by breaking down large quantities of rock, often by acid preparation, and then patiently sorting through what remains. Ordovician rocks from around the world have proved to be a rich source of microvertebrate fauna, which have revealed new lines of vertebrate evolution. Bony plates, scales, and possibly teeth appeared for the first time in vertebrates in the Ordovician, but the reasons for the evolution of these characteristic vertebrate features are still poorly known. Bone is composed of calcium phosphate, and some scientists have suggested that it evolved as a way for the animal to remove excess phosphorus from its body, and perhaps to then use the bony skeleton as a phosphorus reservoir, available to be reabsorbed when needed. Phosphorus is an important component in several physiological processes. Bony plates and scales could also have evolved as a means of providing protection against predators or parasites, or as insulation for electroreceptors, sensory organs sensitive to electrical signals. Conodont elements are microfossils that are widespread in marine sedimentary rocks from the late Cambrian to the late Triassic. They were first described in 1856 as tiny tooth-like elements, and became a useful tool in the dating of rocks. However, their origin remained a mystery until 1982, when a fortuitous discovery in a collection finally associated conodont elements with an actual animal. This conodont animal, from Carboniferous rocks in Scotland, possessed V-shaped muscle blocks and what appeared to be eyes at the front of the body. Another conodont animal, from Ordovician rocks in South Africa, appears to have had muscles associated with the eyes. Held within the body, in the approximate region of the gill arches, were the conodont elements. Their assembled arrangement and the wear patterns on these elements were suggestive of a feeding mechanism. Conodont elements are said to be made of bone and enamel, and all of these features are characteristic of vertebrates. Despite this, the identification of conodonts as true vertebrates remains controversial. Jawless fish, agnathans, were the most common vertebrates of the Silurian. However, new vertebrate groups appeared and diversified during the period. The oceans were home to a key development jaws, and by the end of the Silurian, all the major groups of vertebrates had evolved. The period of glaciation that ended the Ordovician extended into the Silurian, but gradually the ice melted, sea levels rose, and the oceans became warmer. While plants and invertebrates sought to establish themselves on land, vertebrates continued to take advantage of the hospitable environment offered by the oceans. And it was the Silurian seas that saw what is probably the most important advance in vertebrate history: The evolution of jaws. The possession of jaws enabled the development of new types of behavior. With jaws, an object can be grasped firmly, and if those jaws have teeth, food can be sliced into pieces small enough to swallow, while hard items can be ground down. Eating plants was now an option, and many jawed vertebrates became larger than their jawless contemporaries. With or without teeth, a strong pair of jaws can be a powerful weapon for killing or defense, but jaws can also be used to hold on tight to a partner during courtship or mating, and to carry young. Objects can be manipulated with jaws, holes can be dug, stones can be moved, and pieces of plants can be used to build nests. The possibilities for jawed vertebrates were many and varied. The sarcopterygians, or lobe-finned fish, are important jawed vertebrates because they are the group from which tetrapods, four-legged animals, evolved. They were thought to have first appeared in the early Devonian, but in 1997 parts of the skull and lower jaw of a new fish, Saurolepis, were found in China's Yunnan province, proving that sarcopterygians first evolved even earlier, in the late Silurian. However, the main radiation of sarcopterygians, including several other new and primitive forms found more recently in China, occurred in the early Devonian. Often called the Age of Fish, the Devonian saw a major radiation of fish groups both in marine and freshwater environments. By the late Devonian, the stage was set for an invasion of the land, with the arrival of the first four-legged vertebrates, the tetrapods. Devonian seas teemed with life, and a wide variety of fish evolved and spread around the globe, including the first true sharks. Jawless fish, such as the osteostracans, were the first to explore estuaries and lagoons and were followed by jawed predators, including placoderms and the sarcopterygians, bony fish with lobed fins. It was the sarcopterygians that gave rise to the first vertebrates to venture onto land. Tetrapods are four-legged animals, and include amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The earliest known tetrapods appeared in the late Devonian about 365 million years ago, in the form of Acanthostega and Ichthyostega. They are assigned to the class Sarcopterygii and evolved from the lobe-finned fish. Recent research has established that the fish most closely related to the tetrapods is Tiktaalik rosei, whose fossils were found in 375 million-year-old rocks on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic in 2004. Tiktaalik and another closely related sarcopterygian fish, Panderichthys rhombolepis, which lived about 380 million years ago, have flattened skulls and dorsally placed eyes, similar to Acanthostega. The discovery of the fossils of Acanthostega and Ichthyostega overturned some entrenched misconceptions about the evolution of the first tetrapods. Originally, it was thought that tetrapods had 5 fingers and toes, digits, when hands and feet evolved from fish fins. However, Acanthostega has 8 digits, while Ichthyostega has 7, indicating that the number of digits was variable and only became fixed at 5 later in tetrapod evolution. In addition, the idea that tetrapods first evolved when they lumbered onto the land also proved to be incorrect. The fossil specimens of Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were found in rocks in Greenland that were clearly deposited in a river environment, indicating that these early tetrapods lived in streams or small rivers. The fossils are well preserved and nearly complete rather than being disarticulated, indicating that these animals died and were buried very close to where they lived, rather than being transported any great distance. Also, their paddle-like limbs were more suited to swimming than walking, and Acanthostega had a fish-like tail. Although they both had lungs and could breathe air, they retained internal gills. It seems that tetrapods in the Devonian were gradually adapting to the final transition from water to land. Their conquest of the would not be completed until the Carboniferous. The Gogo Formation in Western Australia is the remains of an extensive Devonian reef system. Many placoderms have been preserved there in limestone nodules. These nodules can be dissolved with acetic acid, revealing the fossilized fish within. The preservation is so fine that placoderm muscle tissue has recently been discovered, as well as evidence of embryos within the body of the mother. In Meterpicus attenboroughii, the embryo is connected to its mother by an umbilical cord. These embryos provide some of the earliest evidence in the fossil record of internal fertilization and gestation. In external fertilization, sperm from the male mixes with eggs in the water and the embryos develop outside of the female. Although the outline of Stethocanthus was similar to that of modern sharks, there are striking differences. The tail fin is almost symmetrical in modern sharks. The upper lobe is usually much larger than the lower lobe. The pectoral fins had a long, distinctive rod, called the whip, which trailed behind the fin. A third distinctive feature is the large structure projecting from its back. Sometimes called the ironing board, because of its shape, Its upper surface was studded with a dense patch of denticles, tiny, tooth-like granules embedded in the skin. The only other place denticles appeared was in a patch on the head. These features, probably present only in males, may have been important for gripping females during mating. Ichthyostega was the first Devonian tetrapod to be discovered. Its fossils come from rocks in East Greenland, and it lived at the same time as Acanthostega. Ichthyostega has many unique features that have puzzled paleontologists for decades, but new research is clarifying some aspects of its structure. Its ear region, for example, appears to have been adapted for hearing in water rather than in air. Ichthyostega certainly spent some of its time in water, but its vertebral column seems to have been adapted to a form of terrestrial locomotion. Its body was encased in broad, overlapping ribs, which together with its robust shoulders and forearms, suggest that strong muscles were used to pull the animal along on land. Its paddle-like hind limbs were better adapted for swimming. In many respects, Tiktaalik is a fish that shows even more tetrapod-like features than Panderichthys. For example, Panderichthys has a series of bones that joins the skull to the shoulder girdle. There is also a series of bones that covers the gill region. These bones are absent in tetrapods, and most of them are also absent in Tiktaalik, at least, they have never been found. And many of the tetrapod features that Tiktaalik does share with Panderichthys appear to be at a more advanced stage in the transition to land vertebrates. For example, it has an even longer snout and shorter rear portion of the skull than Panderichthys and a wider round notch, the spiracular notch, at the back of the skull.
Dunkleosteus was a heavily armored fish, but its armor did not enclose its pectoral fins at the rear. This development allowed the fin base to increase in length and aided mobility, suggesting that Dunkleosteus was an active hunter in the shallow seas in which it lived. The upper and lower parts of its trunk shield were connected only by small, non-projecting spinal plates. Its lower jaw and front upper tooth plate eventually wore down, leaving fang-like points. Dunkleosteus lacked ornament in most species, but its plates often bear bite marks and puncture wounds, indicating that, despite its size, it was itself hunted.
From their origins in the Devonian, tetrapods diversified within the coal swamps of the Carboniferous, adapting to different lifestyles, including those of aquatic opportunists and terrestrial predators. In the oceans, highly armored fish were replaced by more active swimmers with much thinner scales. The Carboniferous period could be called the Age of Coal, for the thick swamps of coal-forming plants that grew on land. The end of the Devonian saw the extinction of placoderms, heterostracans, and osteostracans. In the Carboniferous, advanced jawed fish, including chondrichthyans, spiny sharks, acanthidians, and ray-finned fish in particular, dominated the seas, lakes, and rivers. On land, tetrapods flourished, perhaps aided by the arthropod colonization. The Carboniferous opens with a 20-million-year period of poor fossilization known as Roemer's Gap, after the American paleontologist Alfred Roemer. The fossil record then reveals a wide diversity of fauna, so there must have been a major radiation of species during those gap years. The earliest tetrapods evolved in estuaries during the late Devonian, and their anatomy suggests they had to live in water. They retained tail fins and internal gills. Basically, they were fish with legs. During and shortly after Roemer's Gap, the tetrapods changed, whereas they were still adapted to live in the water. Many, including the Embolomeres and Crassigyrinus, retained their tail fins, but seem to have lost their internal gills. Amphibamus had only 4 fingers, which suggests they were more capable of coming onto land. The famous fossil site of East Kirkton in Scotland provides ample evidence of the world's oldest known vertebrate terrestrial community. The fossil fauna recovered includes a highly diverse collection of tetrapods, with many animals more specialized to live on land. Temnospondyles first appear here, including a species that lacks many of the hallmarks of life in the water. Lepispondyles are also present, represented by the snake-like Astapodophyterpeton, which would have been as comfortable on land as in the water. But most striking are the reptile-like animals, including Westlothiana, which was hailed as the first amniote, although this interpretation is disputed. If correct, it would have represented the first time reproduction was freed from needing water, a necessary step toward fully occupying the land. However, in the late Carboniferous, undisputed amniotes became prominent members of a truly terrestrial fauna. The first tetrapods inherited simple eggs from their fish ancestors that were fertilized outside the body. Water was critical for reproduction because the thin membrane surrounding the egg would not protect it against drying out on land. Water was also necessary to carry sperm to the eggs. This mode of reproduction is called amphibious, and is still seen in frogs and salamanders. In order to become fully terrestrial, it was necessary to protect the egg from drying. This was accomplished by the amniotes, reptiles, birds and mammals, in addition to 3 new members of the egg: chorion, amnion, and allantois. These membranes, together with the yolk sac, also help support the growing embryo by providing nutrients and collecting waste. Around the outermost membrane lies the shell, which may be leathery and flexible, as in many turtles and lizards, or mineralized and hard, best known in birds, but also found in crocodiles and many tortoises. Amniotes further became independent from water by their mode of reproduction. Instead of releasing sperm into water over eggs, the male places sperm within the reproductive system of the female, where it travels to and fertilizes the egg. After fertilization, the extra membranes and shell are formed, and the egg is laid on dry land. Among amniotes, mammals have gone one step further, doing away with the shell and retaining the egg inside the mother. Monotremes are the exception. Since they still lay eggs, the extra membranes are modified to interact with tissues of the mother in order to directly nourish the developing fetus. This modification is called the placenta. Amphibamus was one of the first carboniferous amphibians discovered. It was the first temnospondyl to have the type of teeth that are seen in frogs and salamanders today, and is thought to be closely related to the ancestor of these two groups. Its tall, thin teeth each had 2 tiny spikes at the tip and were hinged partway down their length. Amphibamus means equal legs, owing to its long front and hind limbs being the same size, like those of salamanders. But it was small by temnospondyl standards. At the site where Amphibamus was discovered, paleontologists have also found several tiny amphibian fossils that look like Brachiosaurus, but share features with Amphibamus. These may be Amphibamus larvae, which suggests some degree of metamorphosis was already happening in this early amphibian. For example, these fossils have a long tail with a fin, like a tadpole, while the adult Amphibamus had a short stumpy tail that was more in common with the missing tail in modern frogs and toads.
Archaeocodon was one of the largest early synapsids. It resembled a crocodile, with long jaws and numerous pointed teeth that were ideal for catching fish. Flattened finger and toe bones suggest that it was partly aquatic and could use its limbs as paddles. Unlike later pelycosaurs, such as Dimetrodon, Archaeocodon was not well adapted for killing large animals. It lived like a crocodile, lurking at the water's edge to ambush smaller terrestrial vertebrates, as well as catch fish. However, being a synapsid, Archaeocodon was much more closely related to mammals than to modern crocodiles. This is an example of convergent evolution, where adaptations to a particular way of life evolve separately in different groups of animals. Proterogyrinus was one of the earliest anthrocosaurs, coal lizards, a group of amphibians that were top predators for much of the Carboniferous. Although it ate fish, Proterogyrinus was not fully aquatic. It was one of the first vertebrates to have the long curved ribs and muscles that are used to pump air in and out of the lungs. This evolutionary adaptation developed after vertebrates had moved onto the land.
Opening with a murmur and ending with a bang, the Permian saw the rise of advanced synapsids. In the oceans, ray-finned fish continued to diversify, while terrestrial vertebrates evolved a new type of predator, the cynodont. Meanwhile, herbivores were perfecting sophisticated chewing mechanisms. The rise of advanced synapsids, mammal-like reptiles, was the most important evolutionary event of the Permian, because it was critical to the emergence of mammals and, ultimately, modern humans. As the Permian progressed, the terrestrial fauna took on a more familiar setup, with relatively few predators feeding on the more numerous herbivores. The top predators of the late Carboniferous were sprawling in posture, demonstrating a less active mode of life, similar to many modern reptiles. By the late Permian, synapsid predators had evolved features that enabled active hunting. Their limbs had elongated and were placed more directly under the body. Their teeth had differentiated into incisors, canines, and cheek teeth, and their eyes had moved farther forward, improving stereoscopic vision. These early cynodonts had nearly all the characteristics of mammals. Nowhere is the evolution of mammalness more clear than in the middle ear. Mammals have 3 middle ear bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes. All other tetrapods have only the stapes. The fossil record of synapsids shows how these two extra bones, once part of the jaw articulation, were freed from their jaw bracing function to become integrated into the middle ear region, where they form part of the sound detecting apparatus used in hearing. The Permian ended with the greatest mass extinction of all, with an estimated 95% of all marine and 70% of terrestrial species dying out after volcanic eruptions poisoned the oceans and atmosphere. Xenacanth sharks have been described mostly on the basis of isolated tooth found in marine and freshwater rocks from all over the world. As in all other shark groups, two pairs of fins projected from the belly region, the pectoral fins closest to the head, and the pelvic fins closest to the tail. These acted as hydrofoils, lifting the shark as it moved through the water. The male had a pair of rod-like claspers projecting backward from the pelvic fins, used to deposit sperm directly into the female's body during mating. The final fin on the underside of Xenacanthus was the anal fin, which was divided into two parts. Its tail was completely in line with the rest of the body and the upper and lower lobes were about the same size. Archaeops is one of the best known of the temnospondyl amphibians. A large number of specimens have been collected, and because the animal was large and robust, these specimens are remarkably well preserved. Archaeops was also unusual among early amphibians in that the entire skeleton was ossified, made from bone, which is far more readily fossilized. Its contemporaries had more cartilage in their skeletons, and because these were not mineralized, their complete anatomy has not survived. Archaeops first appeared in the late Carboniferous of North America, but most specimens that have been found come from the early Permian. Archaeops was one of the top predators in its ecosystem. It resembled a short, fat alligator and almost certainly fed on fish and small amphibians. The long rectangular muzzle is the basis of its name, which means drawn-out face. Archaeops probably underwent a change of diet during the Permian. Early specimens have a muzzle shaped like a rounded shovel with small, almost marginal teeth suitable for seizing small fish. However, later Archaeops, including the one shown here, had a longer, more rectangular snout with clumps of larger teeth at intervals, much like those found in modern crocodiles, which feed on larger animals caught at waterholes and in rivers. Simoria was a small carnivore that, for many years, was considered to be close to the amphibian-reptile transition. There was much debate as to whether it was a reptile or not until paleontologists noticed that its smaller relative, Discosauruscus, had external gills and lateral line canals in its juvenile stage. This pointed to Simoria being pre-reptile, and it is now considered to be a primitive amphibian tetrapod that paralleled reptiles in some of its adaptations to terrestrial life. Diplocaulus is one of the most common fossils found in the Texas red beds, but it has no living relatives. From the neck backward, it resembles a fat salamander, but its skull is a strange boomerang shape, with long, flattened horns on each side. One idea is that these horns acted like hydrofoils by using them to manipulate the water current. Diplocaulus could gain lift or downward thrust, which enabled it to rise and sink with little effort.
Scutosaurus was a large herbivore belonging to the Parasaur group. All parasaurs had long, thick ribs forming a barrel-shaped chest. The large torso contained an extensive digestive tract to break down tough plant material. Blunt teeth were capable of cropping vegetation, not chewing it. Its skull was broad and flat, and short, down-pointing tusks hung from its lower jaw and the sides of its face.
Moschops was a thick-skulled herbivore with stout legs and thick ribs that formed a large, barrel-shaped chest. It had a very large gut for digesting tough plant matter. Overall, Moschops was a heavily built animal, and full-grown adults probably had little to fear from the predators of the day. The Dinocephalians, which included Moschops, were one of the earliest therapsid groups to evolve and were very common in the first part of the late Permian. They diversified to exploit many of the ecological roles formerly carried out by pelycosaurs. Carnivorous and herbivorous Dinocephalians are known, but all of them have peculiar front teeth. Unlike those of other animals, the upper incisors do not overlap the lower incisors, but interlock with them, allowing effective nipping. Adaphosaurus was a herbivorous pelycosaur with numerous blunt teeth that formed crushing plates. The teeth were not just around the jaws but also on the roof of the mouth and sides of the lower jawbone. Although it was herbivorous, Adaphosaurus was not related to Cotylarhynchus. One of the most distinctive features of Adaphosaurus is the sail crest on its back. Unlike the sail of Dimetrodon, small prongs branched off from the main rods that supported the sail, giving them the appearance of twigs. Despite this difference, The sails of Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus probably evolved for the same purpose, trapping heat while basking. This meant that Edaphosaurus could warm its body quickly in the morning sun and become active before many predators. Dimetrodon is often included in dinosaur books, and thus commonly mistaken for a dinosaur. It is an early synapsid, and in fact more closely related to mammals, with which it shares some anatomical features, such as a single hole in the skull behind the eye. It lived in the early Permian, at least 40 million years before the first dinosaurs, and lacks dinosaur features, such as upright legs. Dimetrodon was among the largest carnivorous pelycosaurs and was the most fearsome predator of its time. Its high skull and relatively short snout gave it a powerful bite. Dimetrodon means two-sized tooth and refers to the two sizes of teeth in the jaw. The two canine-like fangs in the upper jaw were roughly located in the position of canine teeth of modern mammals, such as dogs and humans, and their roots extended through the bone all the way up the side of the face. Although they are not as striking as the saber teeth of big cats, they were powerful and deadly. In all, Dimetrodon had 80 large, pointed teeth, which show that it was specialized for killing other large land vertebrates. The Triassic was a critical time in vertebrate evolution. It is regarded as the birth of modern ecosystems, as successful living groups such as mammals, turtles, and archosaurs arose in the aftermath of the devastating Permo-Triassic extinction, which killed off many primitive reptile and amphibian groups. The list of vertebrates that arose during the Triassic is staggering: dinosaurs, crocodilomorphs, pterosaurs, mammals, turtles, ichthyosaurs, and frogs. The Triassic, which stretched from 250 to 200 million years ago, was a time of transition. Archaic groups that had dominated Permian ecosystems, such as many mammal-like reptiles, had faded into extinction, and the arid, Triassic Pangaea was the perfect breeding ground for entirely new groups of vertebrates, many of which remain successful today. The Permo-Triassic extinction was the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history. Up to 95% of all species became extinct after volcanic eruptions poisoned the atmosphere. Among the departed were several groups of terrestrial, land-living, vertebrates, most notably many synapsids, mammal-like reptiles, insect-eating reptiles, and fish-eating amphibians. In the aftermath, many of the world's ecosystems were barren. The evolutionary clock had been reset and new groups had the opportunity to evolve, expand, and dominate. Within the first few million years of the extinction, ecosystems remained in disarray and a few vertebrates spread across the globe. These so-called disaster taxa, such as Lystrosaurus, were well equipped to withstand a toxic world because they were ecological generalists that could withstand a variety of climates. However, as the atmosphere returned to normal, ecosystems stabilized and major groups like the dinosaurs appeared. The archosaurs, or ruling reptiles, include living birds and crocodilians, along with a range of extinct groups restricted to the Mesozoic, such as the dinosaurs. Archosaurs originated approximately 245 million years ago and quickly spread across the globe, diversifying into an array of different species, which generally can be divided into two groups based on the anatomy of the ankle. The bird-like archosaurs, which include dinosaurs, have a straight hinge joint between the ankle bones and the foot, a metatarsal ankle, which allows for rapid locomotion. However, the crocodile-line archosaurs have a ball and socket joint between the astragalus and calcaneum bones of the ankle, a crurotarsal ankle. This joint allows the two bones to rotate against each other, which offered a degree of maneuverability but prevented most crocodile-line archosaurs from attaining high speed. Dinosaurs are the most familiar of the extinct archosaur groups and are closely related to the flying pterosaurs. The earliest known dinosaurs appeared at the beginning of the late Triassic, approximately 230 million years ago. Dinosaurs quickly diversified into an array of different body forms, but it took them much longer to multiply into a large number of species and to become exceptionally abundant in individual ecosystems. The most primitive dinosaurs, such as Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor, were sleek, bipedal predators boasting ischium, an arsenal of serrated teeth and sharp claws. From these small carnivorous ancestors, dinosaurs proceeded to divide into two major groups, the saurischians and the ornithischians. The saurischians, which include the predatory theropods and the long-necked sauropodomorphs, possess a lizard hip, in which the pubis bone points forwards. The ornithischians, or bird-hip dinosaurs, have a modified pelvis in which the pubis points backward, as in living birds. However, in one of the greatest ironies in paleontology, modern birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs. Tanystropheus must rank among the most bizarre reptiles of all time, instantly recognizable by its outsized, noodle-like neck that was longer than its body and tail combined. This extraordinary neck was more than 934 feet, 3 meters, long, about twice the height of an average man, yet Tanystropheus possessed only 10 greatly elongated cervical vertebrae to support it. A semi-aquatic animal that fed primarily on fish, Tanystropheus could capture fish in the murky waters of the seashore by rapidly extending its neck. This strategy allowed it to take fish while its body remained completely still, in some cases while it stood on dry land. Following the Permo-Triassic mass extinction, entirely new groups of organisms emerged. One of these was Proterosuchus, a Komodo dragon-sized predator that is a distant cousin of the archosaurs, the large group that contains birds, crocodiles, and dinosaurs. The skull of Proterosuchus was long and narrow, with enlarged eye sockets and numerous small, curved teeth. The body was also long and thin, with a flexible, tapering tail. It is likely that Proterosuchus alternated between living on land and in the water, giving it unparalleled access to a range of prey. Although quite small even by today's standards, Proterosuchus was among the largest carnivores of its day. Reptile-like cousins of mammals were some of the most successful herbivores of the late Permian to Middle Triassic periods. One of the last surviving members of this once great group was Placerius. Resembling an ancient hippopotamus, Placerius reached weights of as much as 4,400 pounds, 2,000 kilograms. It lived approximately 220 million years ago in southwestern USA and was the largest herbivore in the region. Although it lived alongside early carnivorous dinosaurs, Placerius was such a successful plant eater that it was much more abundant than rival herbivores. Its skull was ornamented with 2 enormous tusks that were probably used for social display. Fossil discoveries suggest Placerius traveled in large herds. Thrinaxodon, a cat-sized predator, was the most common cynodon of the early Triassic. Like mammals, it had a distinct waist in front of its hips. In addition, its broad ribs interlocked with each other, stiffening its body and making it difficult to breathe via rib movement alone. This suggests that Thrinaxodon used a diaphragm to breathe, a more efficient method, and points to an evolving mammal-like metabolism and similar activity levels. Thrinaxodon's limbs were held almost under its body, as in mammals, and this further supports the suggestion that Thrinaxodon was an active animal, capable of running. The prosauropod Plateosaurus is one of the best understood dinosaurs. Most dinosaurs are known from only a few scraps of bone, or at most, a single skeleton, but Plateosaurus is represented by more than 50 complete skeletons. Most of these have come from the late Triassic basins of Germany, which were deposited 220 million years ago by a series of large rivers. Other specimens have turned up in the glacier-covered rocks of Greenland, and even in drill cores from the bottom of the North Sea. These specimens have allowed scientists to study this dinosaur in remarkable detail. Plateosaurus was one of the largest prosauropods, and some individuals were 33 feet, 10 meters, long and weighed 1,540 pounds, 700 kilograms. Its long mouth was crammed full of leaf-shaped teeth, and these were covered in rough bumps, denticles, that were perfect for grinding vegetation. It is likely that Plateosaurus could walk on either 2 or 4 legs, although recent research suggests that this animal's arms and hands were not very suitable for locomotion and instead were used mainly for collecting food. Its name means flat lizard. During an expedition to Argentina in the late 1980s, a scientist named Paul Sereno and his team came across a curious fossil. No larger than a small human child, this skeleton was clearly a dinosaur, with an open hip socket, an enlarged muscle attachment on the upper arm bone, humerus, and other characteristic features. In many ways it resembled a carnivorous theropod because of its sharp teeth, killer claws, and the ability to walk on 2 hind legs, bipedal gait. Sereno and his colleagues named this dinosaur Eoraptor, one of the most primitive dinosaurs ever found. It lived about 228 million years ago. Dinosaurs began to dominate in the Jurassic. Although dinosaurs originated about 30 million years earlier, it was only after the Triassic-Jurassic extinction of 200 million years ago that they became the top land vertebrates across the world. Meanwhile, in the seas, giant reptilian predators flourished. The major subgroups of dinosaurs, theropods, sauropodomorphs, and ornithischians originated during the late Triassic. However, for the first 30 million years of their history, dinosaurs were only supporting actors on the world stage, and in many ecosystems were outnumbered and outmuscled by cruroterzans, crocodile-line archosaurs. Very suddenly, about 200 million years ago, all cruroterzans except for the crocodilomorphs disappeared in the midst of a global environmental meltdown, as volcanoes spewed toxic gas into the atmosphere and temperatures skyrocketed. This extinction was one of the big 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history, and without it dinosaurs might have never risen to dominance. Crocodilomorphia is the technical term for living crocodiles and alligators and their closest fossil kin. This remarkably successful group is the only surviving remnant of the great cruroterzan radiation of the late Triassic, when crocodile-line archosaurs such as rauisuchians, phytosaurs, and etosaurs dominated ecosystems around the globe. True crocodilomorphs evolved in the late Triassic alongside their cruroterzan cousins. These proto-crocodiles looked nothing like the crocodiles of today, but instead were small, slender animals that walked upright and could run at high speeds. These animals, called sphenasuchians, persisted until deep into the Jurassic. However, during the Jurassic, crocodilomorphs continued to diversify and many specialized subgroups evolved. These included not only sprawling species that lurk at the water's edge, such as living crocodiles, but also an unusual group called metriorhynchids that lived entirely in the open ocean. The Middle and Late Jurassic are often called the Age of Dinosaur Giants. This fitting description pays homage to the evolution of several remarkable groups of colossal dinosaurs, which dominated terrestrial ecosystems across the planet. Foremost among these giants were the long-necked and plant-guzzling sauropods, such as Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus. The late Jurassic was the peak of sauropod evolution. At no other time were these thundering beasts as abundant and diverse. As many as 25 different sauropod species lived alongside each other in the late Jurassic of North America, and today their fossils are common discoveries in the famous Morrison Formation. Other colossal sauropods are known from Africa, China, and Portugal. Some of these creatures were among the largest animals ever to walk the earth, and the ground quaked underneath their footsteps. Many monstrous theropod carnivores lived alongside these herbivores, and probably preying on them. The poster child for Jurassic theropods is Allosaurus, a hatchet-skulled hunter that may have reached lengths of 39 feet, 12 meters, and weights of 4,000 pounds, 1,800 kilograms. Other nightmarish beasts lived alongside Allosaurus, including Ceratosaurus and Torvosaurus. Truly, the Jurassic was an age of giants. The skeleton of Hybatus was very robust and more densely calcified than that of modern sharks. The jaws were solid and armed with rows of teeth that were continuously being replaced, as in modern sharks. The teeth measured up to 3/4 of an inch, 2 centimeters, long, and varied in shape. Some had a series of upright spikes or cusps, while others were low and stubby. In contrast to living sharks, in which the mouth opens on the underside of the head, the mouth of Hybatus opened at the end of the snout. In addition to pelvic claspers, used to insert sperm directly into the female, a male Hybatus also had specialized spines in the soft tissues of its head. These may have helped the male grip the female during mating. 1 or 2 pairs of these spines were situated just behind the eye.
Liopleurodon was the apex predator of Europe's seas during the Middle to Late Jurassic. This monstrous reptile reached lengths of 33 feet 10 meters, making it larger than a modern-day killer whale. Liopleurodon was a plesiosaur, a stout-chested carnivorous marine reptile. Most plesiosaurs were long-necked and fed on fish. However, Liopleurodon was one of the pliosaurids, a subset of fearsome, predatory plesiosaurs with shorter necks and larger heads. Like other pliosaurids, Liopleurodon used its powerful jaws, which were up to 5 feet 1.5 meters long and studded with conical teeth, to spear marine reptiles and large fish. Although hefty, its body was streamlined, and it used its four-paddle-like limbs to drive itself through the water. Liopleurodon was an amazingly successful animal. It existed for around 10 million years and inhabited a wide belt of seas across all of ancient Europe. Leedsichthys was first discovered near Peterborough, England in 1886, possibly the largest fish that ever lived. Leedsichthys was first discovered near Peterborough, England in 1886. Despite its formidable size, Leedsichthys was a harmless filter feeder. Its huge mouth could take in large volumes of water in a single gulp. It then sifted microorganisms from the seawater with gill rakers, or mesh plates at the back of its mouth, just as basking sharks and baleen whales do today.
Leetsichthys is classified with the pachycormids, fish that have partly calcified skeletons. Because cartilage does not fossilize well, the lack of calcification means that many of its bones have not been preserved and others are so thin that they are easily crushed. Teeth, however, are more robust than bones, and it has been possible to estimate that Leetsichthys had more than 40,000 of them.
Dacosaurus was the largest and fiercest member of a group of marine reptiles distantly related to modern crocodiles. This behemoth was much larger than the other marine reptiles that, along with fish, formed most of its diet. It was well adapted to life in the open oceans, with a streamlined body and paddle-like limbs. However, unlike many of its relatives, which had tubular snouts, Dacosaurus had a deep skull that resembled those of predatory dinosaurs such as Tyrannosaurus. Its teeth were also similar to those of theropods, as well as modern killer whales. They were large, narrow, and covered with an array of sharp serrations, perfect for cutting flesh. Ceratosaurus was a formidable and frightening predator. Its name horned reptile is a reference to its rounded nasal horn, but it also had tall triangular or rounded horns in front of its eyes. It had a large, deep skull that was well suited for a life of preying on large animals. Unique among theropods, Ceratosaurus had a continuous row of flat bony plates known as scutes running along its neck, back, and tail, which was deep but narrow. A small, lightly built predator, Ornitholestes ate small animals, such as insects, lizards, frogs, and dinosaur hatchlings. Its front upper teeth were particularly long and, unusually, had flattened tips. The shape of the bones at the snout tip once led to the suggestion that it might have had a nasal horn, but new observations have shown that this was probably not the case. Its three-fingered hands were long and slender. Ornitholestes was almost certainly covered with filament-like feathers. Dryosaurus was a medium-sized, bipedal ornithopod with short arms and tiny hands. Its skull was short and tall, with a sloping upper surface and a narrow beak, which suggests that it was a selective feeder that browsed on leaves. Dryosaurus is the beal-known member of a small group of ornithopods called the Dryosaurids. Named after Dryosaurus, their name means tree lizards. Once thought to be close relatives of Hypsilophodon, we now know that Dryosaurids were members of the Iguanodontia, a group that also includes Camptosaurus, Iguanodon, and the Hadrosaurs. Primitive, Dryasaurid-like iguanodontians that had evolved a variety of body sizes and lifestyles prior to the evolution of the more familiar hadrosaurs have also been discovered. One of the best known of all dinosaurs, Diplodocus was like other diplodocids in having 15 neck vertebrae, proportionally short forelimbs, and a whip-like tip to its tail. Its skull is rectangular and ends with a broad, squared-off mouth. Diplodocus had triangular spines along its back, and this was possibly the case in all sauropods. Studies of toothwear suggest that Diplodocus used a feeding strategy known as unilateral branch stripping. A branch was gripped between its peg-like teeth, its head was pulled sharply upward or downward, and as a result either the upper or lower tooth row stripped the foliage off the branch. 3 species of Diplodocus are currently recognized, and another diplodocid, originally named Seismosaurus, is now regarded as a 4th, and the largest, Diplodocus species. Stegosaurus the plated lizard is the best-known stegosaur, and was the first member of that group to be named. Its bizarre, diamond-shaped plates have been the cause of much disagreement, but recent work has shown that they were arranged in 2 staggered rows that ran along the neck, back, and tail. In most other stegosaurs the plates were paired, so Stegosaurus was unusual in that respect. It has often been suggested that the plates were used in defense, or stout fingers were also well suited for supporting its weight, which suggests that it may have walked on 4 legs while it foraged. Later iguanodontians became increasingly quadrupedal. Most Camptosaurus fossils have been found in late Jurassic rocks in North America. It shared its habitat with herbivores such as Stegosaurus and Diplodocus, and it would have been preyed on by theropods such as Allosaurus. One of the most abundant of all Jurassic theropods, Allosaurus is known from many specimens discovered in the Morrison Formation in western USA. A formidable predator, its large skull and jaws held sharp, serrated teeth, and the 3 large claws on its hands may have been used to grip the sides of prey. Its powerful jaws and claws, combined with its considerable size, have led most scientists to imagine Allosaurus as a predator of stegosaurs, ornithopods, and perhaps sauropods. Evidence for the fact that Allosaurus fed on these large plant-eating dinosaurs comes from tooth marks preserved on their bones, although like all predators it would also have scavenged on dead dinosaurs as well. One Allosaurus specimen has a hole in one of its tail vertebrae exactly matching the size and shape of a stegosaur tail spike. On this occasion, it seems that the herbivore succeeded in causing a major injury to the predator. The Cretaceous was the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, and at no point in their history were dinosaurs as abundant, diverse, and dominant. However, in the shadow of the dinosaurs, groups such as birds, mammals, and crocodiles also diversified, setting the stage for the modern world. The dusty, sage-covered badlands of Montana and South Dakota preserve the best record of the final act of the age of dinosaurs. Here, the Hell Creek Formation yields spectacular fossils of Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, and Edmontosaurus, some of the last dinosaurs to survive before a sudden asteroid impact 65 million years ago. One of the most extraordinary and important discoveries of modern paleontology is that birds evolved from dinosaurs. The closest relatives of birds are theropods such as Velociraptor and Deinonychus, swift, sleek, keen predators with large brains and high metabolisms. More recently, even closer relatives of birds have been found. These include raptors such as Microraptor, which were small, lived in trees, could probably even glide or fly. Indeed, today there is barely any distinction between the most bird-like dinosaurs and the earliest true birds. All of these animals were small, brainy, covered in feathers, and capable of flying. Put simply, the dinosaur bird lineage is one of the best examples of a major evolutionary transition in the fossil record. The oldest true bird is Archaeopteryx, a crow-sized flyer known from a handful of spectacular fossils from the late Jurassic of Germany. In many ways Archaeopteryx is half bird and half dinosaur. Like dinosaurs it has teeth, claws, and a long tail, but like birds it has broad wings with asymmetric flight feathers and a brain adapted for powerful flight. Bird evolution kicked into high gear during the Cretaceous, as exemplified by the wonderful menagerie of feathered fossils from China's Liaoning province. These fossils belong to an array of groups, primitive birds little changed from of strange and wholly extinct groups, and even early representatives of the lineage leading to modern birds. Clearly, birds were the dominant flying creatures of the Cretaceous, and after the dinosaur extinction they continued to diversify. Marine ecosystems went through a remarkable period of change during the Mesozoic. This massive reorganization occurred on all levels, from primary producers all the way up to top predators. Large predators such as sharks and mosasaurs spread around the world, and bony fish became astonishingly common. The changes were not limited to vertebrates, and, in fact, many of the greatest changes involved invertebrates and microscopic organisms. The major modern groups of planktonic microorganisms, the primary producers that form the base of every oceanic food web, originated and diversified during this time. Meanwhile, archaic invertebrates that were common during the Paleozoic, such as crinoids and brachiopods, were marginalized, and more modern groups such as clams, scallops, and heavily armored gastropods exploded in abundance. The reasons for these changes are complex, but are likely to involve predation pressure from newly evolved giant predators, such as some sharks, as well as continental breakup and changes in sea level and ocean chemistry that are poorly understood. The extinction of the dinosaurs has been one of the greatest mysteries of Earth's history. What could cause such a successful group to die off? 65 million years ago a massive asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. Most scientists think that this impact set in motion a chain reaction of environmental disturbances, such as tsunamis and acid rain, which spelled the end for the dinosaurs.
The largest known bony fish, Xiphactinus, was a formidable predator. It had a long, well-muscled body with a backbone of over 100 vertebrae. This, and the deeply forked tail, indicate that it was a powerful swimmer and probably pursued its prey rather than ambushing it. The upturned lower jaw could gape widely, allowing it to consume large fish and possibly small marine reptiles. A 612 feet, 2 meters, ichthyodectid fish has been found in the fossilized stomach contents of a 13 feet, 4 meters, Xiphactinus. In turn, Xiphactinus have been found in the fossilized stomach contents of a shark, suggesting that, despite its size and ferocity, it was not the top predator in its ancient ecosystem.
Squalocorax means crow shark. Like Cretoxorhina, it is an extinct member of the mackerel shark group. It had a typical shark body shape, and its teeth were similar in outline to those of a modern tiger shark. It was a top predator and probably fed on mosasaurs, turtles, and fish. Isolated teeth have been found alongside a skeleton of Cretoxorhina, which suggests it may also have scavenged on the carcasses of its larger cousins. Lepisosteus, gar pikes, first appeared about 110 million years ago. Today they are found in freshwater habitats in North and Central America and Cuba. They are similar in appearance to lizardfish, and it is possible they evolved in parallel to suit particular niches that existed in both saltwater, lizardfish, and freshwater, gar pike, environments. Modern gars, such as L. oculatus, have changed little from their early Cretaceous ancestors, which makes them living fossils. Beelzebufo, devil toad, was only discovered in 2008. Its most remarkable feature is its size, which is far larger than any other known frog or toad, living or fossil. It would have coexisted with the last dinosaurs, and been large enough to eat their newly hatched young. Beelzebufo is a close relative of the living South American horned frogs that ambush their prey, using their huge mouth and the large, fang-like spikes of bone in their jaws to grab small animals as they pass. Its resemblance to modern South American frogs, rather than living Madagascan frogs, is yet more support for a past connection between South America, India, and Madagascar in the Cretaceous. Hesperornis, meaning western bird, was a large, flightless seabird with tiny wings, massive feet, and a toothed bill. First named in the 1870s, it is the best-known member of a group known as the Hesperornithines, most of which were flightless. The wings on Hesperornis were so small that the hands and even lower arms were absent, and only a small, rod-shaped upper arm bone remained. The legs were placed far back on the body, as they are in modern birds that swim underwater. The toes were long and could close up tightly when the bird was pulling its leg back toward its body while diving. Skin impressions preserved with one specimen show that the toes were not webbed paddles but had large, fleshy lobes projecting from their sides.
Mouse-sized Eomea is currently one of the oldest and most primitive members of Eutheria, the mammal group that includes modern placental mammals and their fossil relatives. Its name means dawn mother, reflecting its crucial position within our own family tree. Eomea is from the Ishian Formation of Jihol, China. Like other fossils from this site, the outline of Eomea's body has been preserved. Its bones are surrounded by a thick coat of fur, and its long tail is covered in short hairs. The hands and feet of Eomea were similar to those of modern climbing mammals, such as possums and dormice, so it is thought that Eomea clambered about in bushes and trees. Tall, sharp points, or cusps, on its teeth suggest that it was a predator of insects and other small animals.
Elasmosaurus was one of the last plesiosaurs. More than half its total body length was made up of the neck, which contains 71 vertebrae, more than any other animal that has ever existed. This was a source of great confusion for Edward Drinker Cope, who described the first specimen in 1869, because he placed the head on the end of the tail, which he had misidentified as the neck. Elasmosaurus had a relatively small head and probably ambushed fish by maneuvering its neck. Its long, narrow teeth would have been perfect for piercing and trapping small, soft prey. Named after Kronos, a titan of Greek legend, Kronosaurus was among the last of the giant plesiosaurids, a group of plesiosaurians with large heads and short, stocky necks. However, recent work shows that Kronosaurus was not as enormous as was once thought, and its estimated length has been reduced from 39 feet, 12 meters, to 30 feet, 9 meters. Like other plesiosaurids, it used 4 large flippers to swim, but whether it used these to row like the oars of a boat or fly underwater like a sea turtle is not known. It is possible that the answer is somewhere in between. For about 20 million years during the late Cretaceous, the oceans teemed with one of the most spectacular groups of predators to ever evolve, the mosasaurs. These were gigantic relatives of today's lizards and snakes, that were adapted for life in the sea. Mosasaurus was a voracious, crocodile-like hunter that swam by undulating its long body. As a result, it was incapable of swimming fast over long distances, but it could accelerate very rapidly when required. It probably lived in the well-lit surface waters of the oceans, hunting slower-moving prey. Its bite marks have been found on ammonites and on the shells of large turtles, suggesting that it was capable of catching sizable prey. The first Mosasaurus skull was discovered in 1774 in Maastricht, Holland, in a limestone quarry.
During the late Cretaceous, North America was almost cut in two by a vast inland sea that stretched from the Arctic Ocean all the way to the present-day Gulf of Mexico. A strange menagerie of prehistoric life inhabited these warm waters, including enormous fish, toothed birds, and a colossal turtle called Protostega. It was one of the largest turtles ever known, reaching lengths of around 94 feet, 3 meters, and weights over 500 pounds, but it was only the second largest turtle of the Cretaceous, after Archelon. Protostega was fully marine and rarely ventured onto land. Its limbs functioned as effective paddles, and its thick shell was relatively light and streamlined so that it could travel quickly through the water. The skull of Protostega was characteristic of a turtle. It was short, wide, lacked teeth on its snout, and sported a sharp beak.
The name Deinosuchus means terror crocodile, and for good reason.
Along with Sarcosuchus,
Deinosuchus was one of the largest crocodilomorphs to ever live, weighing up to 10 tons, 9 tons.
However, it lived much more recently than Sarcosuchus and is a member of the alligatorid family that also includes the modern alligators.
It was one of the most ferocious predators of the North American coastal regions, and in some areas overlapped with tyrannosaurids such as Daspletosaurus. In these ecosystems it was Deinosuchus, not the tyrannosaurids, that was the largest and most powerful predator. Its anatomy and overall body plan was very similar to that of living crocodiles, so it is easy to imagine it as a giant version of living species. It probably hunted in a similar way to modern crocodiles, by lurking around the water's edge and preying on fish, marine reptiles, and the occasional land animal. Pteranodon soared across the shallow seas of North America during the late Cretaceous. It is likely that it flew and hunted in the same way as an albatross. Vast flocks probably glided over the ocean while looking for fish in the surface waters. It is certain that they ate fish because fish bones have been found in the fossilized stomach of one specimen. The skull of Pteranodon was also well adapted for fishing, with long, toothless jaws and a streamlined skull for diving into the water. The colossal late Cretaceous pterosaur Quetzalcoatlus was the largest flying animal of all time. Its wingspan was larger than many small planes, and its 8 feet, 2.5 meters, skull would dwarf even the tallest basketball players. Despite its monstrous size, however, Quetzalcoatlus weighed no more than 550 pounds, 250 kilograms, thanks to a complex system of air sacs inside most of its bones. For a long time scientists thought that most pterosaurs ate fish and spent much of their time gliding over the sea, only venturing over land to catch small mammals and lizards. However, it is now believed that Quetzalcoatlus and its Asdarchid relatives may have spent most of their time flying over land and targeting large vertebrates as prey. It is likely, therefore, that Quetzalcoatlus fueled its enormous metabolic needs by stalking and feeding on dinosaurs. Albertosaurus was closely related to another North American tyrannosaurid, Gorgosaurus. In the past, it was thought that these two were similar enough to be included in the same genus. However, they are currently regarded as distinct because they differ in various skull details. Albertosaurus also seems to have had more slender hind limbs and proportionally smaller forelimbs than Gorgosaurus, but both were similar in size overall. There is an Albertosaurus bone bed that contains the remains of numerous juvenile and adult individuals, a discovery that suggests that Albertosaurus was a social animal. Edmontosaurus, one of the largest and best known of the duck-billed dinosaurs, lived in North America during the late Cretaceous. Edmontosaurus, meaning Edmonton lizard, was named after Edmonton, in Alberta, Canada, where the first fossils were found. A crestless hadrosaur, the bones at the front of its long jaws flared out sideways, forming a duck-like bill used to grab and crop large mouthfuls of vegetation. The term duck-billed dinosaur was originally coined for this species. As in other hadrosaurs, the jaw tips of Edmontosaurus were toothless, and its hundreds of teeth were arranged in tightly filled batteries on both upper and lower jaws. Huge, hollow areas surrounded the nostril openings. The function of these hollows is unknown, but they might have housed balloon-like sacs that the animal could inflate at will. These facial balloons would have enabled Edmontosaurus to make sounds, which may have been used to attract mates, signal to other members of the herd, or threaten rivals. One of the best known of all dinosaurs, the Triceratops, is familiar to most people, with its large neck frill, 2 long brow horns, and a short nose horn. The neck frill lacked the large openings that were normally present in that of most horned dinosaurs. Small, Triangular bones lined the edges of some frills, but these were absent in many specimens. Injuries preserved on skulls show that individuals sometimes fought among themselves, perhaps over mates or territory. Some specimens preserve bite marks made by Tyrannosaurus, and one Triceratops even seems to have had one of its brow horns snapped off by a tyrannosaur. About 15 Triceratops species have been named over the years, all of which were distinguished based on differences in horn shape and size. However, these differences now seem to represent the sort of variation seen among individuals of the same species, and only 2 species are currently recognized. The genus Tyrannosaurus contains the most famous dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus rex. Originally discovered in Montana's late Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation, it was widespread throughout western North America. Tyrannosaurus was one of the largest ever terrestrial carnivores, but whether it was an active hunter or just a scavenger is a subject of much debate. Worn tooth tips and bone fragments preserved in its fossilized feces indicate that it routinely crushed and swallowed bones. Some scientists have argued that this, along with the fact that its arms were too short to grip prey and that it is believed to have had a highly developed sense of smell, supports the idea that it was a scavenger. However, most paleontologists believe that Tyrannosaurus was probably an opportunistic carnivore that was able to actively hunt for prey when it needed to. Following the demise of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous, mammals and birds began to radiate into diverse forms on land, underwater, and in the sky. Early in the Paleogene, fish and reptiles had taken on more recognizable forms and did not change very much. At the start of the Paleocene epoch, 65 million years ago, mammals were small and insectivorous, with little limb or teeth specialization. They soon began to change in order to exploit the ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs growing in size, evolving new modes of locomotion, and diversifying their diets to include plants and other vertebrates. The mammalian radiation continued during the Oligocene. Bats are sparsely represented in the fossil record because their light bones and delicate wing membranes do not fossilize well. For this reason, the precise time in evolutionary history that bats took to the air is not known. However, a few excellent bat fossils that have been found at 2 locations dating from the Eocene epoch, an oil shale pit in Germany and the Green River Formation in Wyoming, show that flying bats existed at least 52.5 million years ago. Their arm and greatly elongated finger bones support a stretchy skin membrane that, powered by muscles, enables flapping flight. Bats probably evolved from a nocturnal insectivore that glided from tree to tree. The first fruit-eating bats did not appear until the Oligocene fossil record. At the beginning of the Paleogene, mammals had unspecialized teeth that could cope easily with their diet of insects. During the Paleocene epoch, however, 2 major groups of mammals, the carnivores and the creodonts, evolved teeth suited to a diet of meat. Carnassial teeth, the defining feature of modern-day carnivores, are supremely adapted to shearing flesh from bone in a scissor-like action, while the large, pointed canines deliver the killing bite. Carnivore ancestors, the Miacids, were small, weasel-sized mammals. Dogs appeared during the Middle Eocene and true cats in the early Oligocene, in parallel with a cat-like group called Nimravids, also known as false saber-tooths. Nidea is thought to have been a freshwater relative of the modern herring. Every year, huge numbers of Nidea fossils are unearthed at quarries in the Green River region, and they are a common sight in rock shops around the world. Most Nidea specimens are small, but very well preserved. The sheer number of specimens suggests that Nidea lived in large schools in the Green River. Nidea's body size and abundance tells us that the fish was probably a secondary feeder, filtering out ostracods, diatoms, and other microscopic plankton in the lake water. Many Nidea skeletons have been found in the stomachs of larger fish. This squirrel-sized primate, nicknamed Ida, is remarkable for being the most complete primate fossil ever found. Even its final meal of leaves and fruit is preserved in its stomach. Darwinius's skeleton shows it to have been an agile but generalized climber, and some scientists think that this animal, while still technically a prosimian, is close to the origins of anthropoid primates, and thus a distant ancestor to humans.
Uintatherium was a giant horned mammal from the Middle Eocene. Most of its fossils have been found in Utah and Wyoming, but it was widespread across North America and Asia, although probably in small numbers. It had huge upper canine tusks that protruded downward and were protected by a bony flange on the lower jaw. The snout had a series of blunt, horn-like growths. Like modern rhinoceroses, both sexes had horns. As is true of horned mammals today, they probably used their horns for display and species recognition. Large upper canines are also used in display of some small deer today. Uintatherium has no living descendants, and where it fits in the family tree of hoofed animals is a controversial subject.
An ancestor of modern whales, Ambulocetus retained strong legs and could walk as well as swim. It may have hunted like crocodiles, lurking in the shallows and then lunging forwards onto land to catch prey that wandered near the water. We know Ambulocetus was a relative of modern whales because of the shape of its skull and teeth. The similarity of its jaw and middle ear to that of modern whales suggests that, like them, it was specialized for underwater hearing and might have lacked the external ear that picks up sounds on land. Ambulocetus is one of many transitional fossils that show how whales evolved from land mammals. Diatryma was a huge, flightless, hunting bird. It is known from complete skeletons found in early and middle Eocene rocks in the western United States that formed from a densely forested landscape. A very similar bird, Gastornis, lived in the forests of Europe at around the same time. Large Diatryma specimens are more than 61/2 of a foot, 2 meters, tall and have a huge skull bearing a robust beak with a hooked tip. Diatryma also had stout legs with massive clawed feet, but the wings were tiny and vestigial because the bird was too heavy to fly. Diatryma was an active hunter, and its powerful hooked beak was ideal for ripping flesh and crushing small bones. It has been calculated that the beak was strong enough to crack open a coconut, and Diatryma probably supplemented its diet by scavenging dead bodies and foraging for fruits and other plant foods. Diatryma was well suited to feeding in the Eocene forests, making use of their high-density food supplies. However, as the global climate warmed, the forests turned to open plains. Despite its immensely powerful bite, Diatryma was no match for the speed and agility of the mammalian carnivores that evolved to hunt on the plains.
Andrewsarchus was a giant predator that lived between about 40 and 37 million years ago. Most of what we know about this mammal comes from a single skull found in Mongolia. The skull is huge, more than 3 feet 3 inches, 1 meter long, and it is estimated that the animal's total body length was about 124 feet, 3.7 meters, with a weight of about 550 pounds, 250 kilograms. That makes Andrewsarchus the largest predatory land mammal that has ever lived. Andrewsarchus's pointed teeth are often worn and blunt. This suggests that it not only hunted large prey but was also a scavenger. Its enormous jaws would have crushed the bones of animal carcasses.
Following the sudden demise of the dinosaurs, the snake Titanoboa was the largest land hunter in the Paleocene. It was also the largest snake ever known, being 30% larger than today's longest species. Its back would have been 3 feet 3 inches, 1 meter, off the ground. Titanoboa's enormous vertebrae were found in coal deposits in Colombia, along with the remains of the crocodiles and turtles preyed upon by the giant snake.
This species was a dog-like predatory mammal that lived across the northern hemisphere in the Oligocene and persisted into the early Miocene in Africa, finally dying out there 15 million years ago.
From the start of the Neogene period 23 million years ago, the world's climate became gradually cooler and drier. This caused deserts and grasslands to advance across much of the continental land surface. Predators and prey either adapted to the new conditions or became extinct. Many mammal groups colonized new continents during the Neogene, crossing land bridges created by lowered sea levels and the collision of landmasses. Ancestral camels originated in North America but crossed to Eurasia about 7 million years ago, where they later evolved into dromedaries and Bactrian camels. Movements to South America about 3 million years ago gave rise to llamas, guanacos, and vicuñas.
The expansion of grasslands gave rise to a new mode of feeding among herbivores grazing. Even-toed ungulates, hoofed mammals, especially ruminants, were better suited to eating the coarse grasses, low in nutritional value, than odd-toed ungulates due to their more highly developed stomachs. Ruminants have four-chambered stomachs with microbes that digest cellulose. They also regurgitate and chew tough plant material before swallowing it again. These adaptations led to a dramatic diversification of artiodactyls such as cattle, sheep, and antelopes during the Miocene at the expense of perissodactyls such as horses, rhinoceroses, and tapirs. The grazers began to herd together for safety while feeding and traveling on their seasonal migrations to find fresh pasture. They evolved to become bigger and faster to evade their predators. In turn, carnivores evolved strategies such as pack and pursuit hunting to help them catch their fast-moving prey.
The advance of grassland in Africa also contributed to apes, hominoids, moving out of the Taurus and adopting a more upright posture. Both modern lineages of whales, the mysticetes, or baleen whales, and the odontocetes, the toothed whales, existed at the start of the Neogene. Toward the end of the Miocene, representatives of several modern whale, dolphin, and porpoise families had appeared, alongside some families that are now extinct. The first true seals, sea lions, and walruses also evolved in the Miocene, and the herbivorous sirenians, dugongs, and manatees diversified. All of these marine mammals were preyed upon by the gigantic shark Carcharodon megalodon. Weighing around 55 tons, 50 tons, or more, Carcharodon was the largest predatory shark that ever lived. The species Megalodon is named for its huge triangular teeth, measuring up to 612 inches, 17 centimeters, high. These teeth have serrations running down both cutting edges, ensuring an efficient slicing action. Cut marks in bones and isolated teeth lying next to fossil carcasses show that Carcharodon must have preyed upon a wide range of whales, dolphins and porpoises, seals, giant turtles, and fish. It probably ambushed its prey by attacking them at speed. Once disabled, the prey could be processed using its huge jaws and colossal bite force. The traditional view is that Carcharodon is a close relative of the modern great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. There are certainly many similarities between the teeth of these two species, and in the absence of a complete specimen, Carcharodon is usually reconstructed using the great white as a model. However, some experts argue that these similarities evolved separately, and that Carcharodon megalodon belongs in a different genus, Carcharocles.
Gavialosuchus was an extinct gharial, crocodile-like reptile from the late Oligocene to early Pliocene of North America and the early Miocene of Europe. Like living gharials, it had a very long skull with a narrow snout that it used to catch fish. Gavialosuchus fossils have been found in coastal deposits, which suggests that it lived in estuaries or shallow seas, where it could have fed on a variety of different types of fish. Although living gharials are restricted to India and Southeast Asia, fossils of different Gavialosuchus species found in Florida, Austria, and Georgia suggest that the group was once distributed in swampy and coastal habitats all over the tropical regions of the world.
Argentavis is by far the largest flying bird to have ever lived. It resembled a gigantic condor, with a wingspan of 26 feet to 8 meters. A large specimen would have weighed 175 pounds, 80 kilograms. This is more than double the wingspan and 5 times the weight of the Indian condor, the largest bird flying today. Argentavis had strong legs and wide feet, so it was able to walk easily. Its bill was long with a hooked tip, like that of an eagle, so it could rip open almost any carcass. Argentavis was almost certainly a scavenger, searching for carrion as it soared in the air, before landing and driving off other large predators from their kills. This giant of the sky would have had to cover a vast territory to find enough food to sustain itself.
Thylacosmilus was a large predatory marsupial that was about the size of today's jaguar. Like the saber-toothed cats such as Smilodon, to which it was unrelated, It had long, saber-shaped upper canine teeth. This is a classic example of convergent evolution. However, in Thylacosemylus, these canines grew continuously throughout its life. When the mouth was closed, the sabers were protected by scimitar-like flanges in the lower jaw. Thylacosemylus was the last line of marsupial carnivores that diversified in isolation in South America. When North and South America became connected via the Panama Land Bridge, around 3 million years ago, placental carnivores, including Smilodon, moved into South America and took their place.
Chalicotherium was a perissodactyl, odd-toed, hoofed mammal that lived between the late Oligocene and the early Pliocene in Europe, Asia, and Africa. It looked somewhat like a large horse, except that it had claws on its toes rather than hooves. The purpose of these claws on a hoofed mammal was a puzzle for some time, but it is now thought that they were used to hook branches and pull them. In addition, Chalicotherium's front limbs were far longer than its back legs, and it had features on the hands and pelvic bones that suggested that it knuckle-walked, much like a gorilla does today. When it was not on the move, Chalicotherium sat for long periods of time on its haunches feeding on vegetation. The relationships of chalicotheres have been a mystery for many years. Recent evidence has shown that they are cousins of the tapirs, but when the claws of Chalicotherium were first discovered, they were thought to be a type of carnivore. Dinotherium was a relative of the mastodons, with tusks that curved down and back from the front of the lower jaw. The purpose of its tusks is still controversial, but it is likely they were used for hooking onto branches to drag them down and make it easier to reach the leaves. Dinotherium was slightly larger than today's African elephant, weighing about 15.5 tons, 14 tons, which makes it the third largest land mammal that ever lived.
With its robust limbs and skull, long tail, and wolf-like teeth, Amphiscyon looked like a large dog with the build of a bear, which is why it is also known as bear dog. Being the largest predator in the Middle Miocene of North America, it was able to kill and eat almost any animal, and also drive off other predators to scavenge their kills. Amphiscyon became extinct in North America, but persisted a little longer in Europe before being driven to extinction by true bears. Paraceratherium, formerly known as Indricotherium, was a gigantic, hornless rhinoceros from the late Oligocene to early Miocene of Asia. Its immense skull alone was 41/4 foot (1.3 meters) long and had two conical upper tusks, flaring lower tusks, and retracted nasal openings suggesting a fleshy proboscis. Its immense size and long neck allowed Paraceratherium to feed on the tops of trees, like a giraffe does today. Despite its huge size, Paraceratherium still had the long toes and limbs of its ancestors, the hyracoodonts, and not the stumpy toes found in similarly huge beasts, such as elephants.
All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night, in the dusty recesses of their minds, wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. This I did.
Throughout the Pleistocene epoch, ice caps advanced and retreated around the globe, forcing vertebrates to move and adapt. Many species succumbed to extinction after the end of the last ice age about 10,000 years ago. Since then, modern humans have had a dramatic impact on the world's fauna. Mammals abounded beyond the edges of the ice caps during the Pleistocene. Large animals were better able to conserve body heat and survive extreme cold than small animals. In addition, several northern species, such as woolly mammoths and woolly rhinos, sported thick fur coats that kept them warm. The ranges of many animals expanded and contracted according to the changing climate and vegetation. For example, reindeer moved southward from the Arctic to southern Europe during glacial periods and, contrastingly, hippos moved northward from Africa to Central Europe during interglacials. Giant mammals were ubiquitous during the Pleistocene. Elephant-like mastodons and car-sized armadillo-like glyptodonts lumbered around North America, while giant ground sloths, which were up to 20 feet, 6 meters, tall and weighed 2,200 pounds, a metric ton, inhabited both North and South America. In Eurasia, there were giant rhinoceroses and a species of giant deer, Megaloceros giganteus, whose antlers measured over 1,112 feet, 3.5 meters, from tip to tip. Australia was home to giant marsupials, including Diprotodon, a hippopotamus-sized relative of the wombat and koala, and Procoptodon, the largest kangaroo to have ever lived. Both of these were prey to the marsupial lion Thylacoleo. A combination of factors is likely to have contributed to the extinction of much of the prehistoric megafauna at the end of the last ice age. These included climate change, which caused many areas to dry out, and pressure imposed by the spread of modern humans, who hunted many of the species and also learned to use fire to clear vegetation and for cooking. Megalania was a heavily built, giant monitor lizard that resembled the Komodo dragon. It was so impressively large and powerful that it was able to eat any of the large Ice Age mammals of Australia, including the rhinoceros-sized wombats known as Diprotodonts and the giant kangaroos. Its great size may have been due partly to the fact that there were few large mammalian predators in Australia. Only the much smaller marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, would have offered Megalania some competition. Megalania vanished about 40,000 years ago, at about the time that the first humans arrived in Australia, although there is no evidence that humans successfully hunted Megalania. It seems more likely that humans were the prey.
A giant, flightless, ostrich-like animal, Epiornis, was heavily built, weighing 880 pounds, 400 kilograms, making it the heaviest bird that ever lived. It fed on a wide variety of fruits, nuts, and seeds. Epiornis coexisted with humans for thousands of years, but became extinct soon after Europeans arrived in Madagascar. The reason for its extinction is unclear, but remains revealed that humans butchered Epiornis, so overhunting may be blamed. Castoroids was a giant Ice Age beaver. Its remains are known from rocks of the late Pliocene and Pleistocene in North America. Fossils have been found primarily around the Great Lakes and in the Midwest, but they have also been dug up in Alaska, Canada, and Florida. Castoroids was the length of a modern bear and weighed up to 220 pounds, 100 kilograms. Its tremendous size was not the only difference with modern beavers. It did not have their simple, chisel-like front teeth, or incisors. Instead, they were larger and broader, reaching to about 6 inches, 15 centimeters long. In addition, Castoroids' tail was longer and narrower than the broad, flat appendage of modern beavers, and its hind limbs were shorter.
This giant bear had a huge body that was covered with long hair, and a relatively short skull with very powerful jaws that were capable of crushing its prey, bones and all. Although the short-faced bear was very large, it had relatively long, slender limbs for a bear, and may have been a fast runner, ambushing its prey with a quick dash from cover, or covering long distances to wear down its prey. It could also have been a scavenger and thief, easily able to drive other hunters away from their kills. The short-faced bear vanished at the end of the last Ice Age, possibly due to competition from humans, although it was so large and fierce that humans probably did not try to hunt it down. In South America, Glyptodon was a giant relative of the armadillo that migrated to southern North America when the Panamanian land bridge appeared 3.5 million years ago. It was a well-protected animal, largely covered in skin-covered bones, known as osteoderms, which served as body armor. Even the tail was armored, being constructed of a series of tapering bony rings made of osteoderms. Although it is known as the Irish elk, Megaloceros was not restricted to Ireland but was found across northern Europe and Asia. Nor was it a true elk. It is actually related to the fallow deer. It was one of the largest deer ever known, at least equal in stature to the modern moose. Its huge palmate antlers resembled those of the moose, but they were even larger. Megaloceros vanished at the end of the last Ice Age, possibly as a result of climate changes that destroyed its habitat. A giant ground sloth, Megatherium, weighed in at 4.4 tons, 4 tons. It was about the size and weight of a bull elephant and was covered with long hair. It walked on the sides of its feet with its claws curled inward, and could prop itself up on its back legs and massive tail. Megatherium vanished at the end of the last Ice Age, when humans arrived in South America, although there is no direct evidence of human attacks. This Ice Age woolly rhinoceros was about the size of a large white rhino, and bore a thick coat of long, shaggy hair. It had a pair of horns that were oval in cross-section and curved backward, which it probably used to shift snow while foraging. The woolly rhino's cheek teeth had the characteristic pie-shaped pattern of crests found in all rhinos, but were also highly ornate, with many additional ridges that increase the grinding surface. Many lines of evidence show that woolly rhinos were mostly grazers, although they could probably eat almost any vegetation. The woolly rhino vanished about 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, probably due to the retreat of its glacial habitat caused by climate changes. Having coexisted with humans for thousands of years, it is unlikely to have been hunted to extinction. This well-known saber-toothed tiger was a large cat, weighing about 880 pounds, 400 kilograms. Despite its name, it was not a member of the tiger subfamily Pantherinae, but belonged to the Machaerodontidae. Smilodon was very muscular and heavily built compared to other big cats. In some ways its body plan was more like that of a bear than a cat, with powerful forelimbs used for wrestling prey to the ground. Smilodon would probably have slashed its victim's throat or belly before retreating to leave it to die of blood loss. Finds of multiple Smilodon fossils suggest that this cat, like modern-day lions, lived and hunted in large social groups. Like many other large mammals, Smilodon vanished at the end of the last ice age, possibly due to competition with humans.
A highly successful and widespread genus of mammoths, Mammuthus lived across the northern continents and Africa throughout the entire Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. Species of Mammuthus include the famous woolly mammoth, which lived along the edges of the Ice Age glaciers, the giant imperial mammoth of milder regions, and a number of dwarf species, which lived on islands such as the Channel Islands of California and Sardinia, Italy. Mammoth DNA, from many examples of freeze-dried and mummified specimens found in the Siberian permafrost, is almost identical to that of living elephants. Indeed, mammoths were much like modern elephants in appearance, except that their tusks were considerably longer and curved inward. One theory attributes their extinction to infectious disease. However, mammoths were hunted by humans all over the world, and that, along with the effects of climate changes, probably contributed to their extinction.